whenever there was like a ridiculous angle, being pitched in the room, in the Raw SmackDown room, and there'd be dead silence, that would sometimes be broken up by laughter, and Vince would just look at the writer, usually me, and just go, "The distance."
Another thing that you mentioned in your book, a good friend of our channel, I mean, Vince Russo does a show for our channel every single week. Uh, so I spoke to him about what you mentioned about him in the book. He does not, unfortunately, remember interviewing you for the position. But at the same time, I mean, you mentioned that you had respect for the man, right? In certain parts of your book, you mentioned that. And also, you call some of his ideas justifiably a little ridiculous. What what was some of the ideas that you enjoyed, and some things about Vince Russo that you maybe did not agree with, did not see eye to eye with?
Well, I mean, if you're talking, beyond that one day that he came back, if you're talking in general,
Right.
there was a lot, yeah, there's a lot of things, yes, and just to give context, my first day, interviewing at WWE, and this was in July or August of '99. I started, when he and Ed Ferrara left. They left in October. I started in November. And I did, I had a full day where I did interview with them, and, I know he doesn't remember, and that's 100% justified. Like, I did not make a good impression in that interview. I know that. And I put that on myself. There's plenty of times, by the way, over the years where I'll encounter someone, either via Twitter or, at WWE, is like, "Oh, I interviewed." And I don't remember the interview either. Like, life moves very, very fast in WWE. It's impossible to remember, every single meeting. Excuse me. But, basically, I was just like everyone else, watching the Attitude Era, loving, what was going on during that time, the whole Austin McMahon, the rise of that, the stuff with Rock, obviously, and Mick. I was glued to my set like everyone else, watching them go back and forth. And I don't know, writing WWE is one of those kind of thankless jobs where you often don't get credit when something goes well, even if you had something to do with it. And you often get a lot of blame if something doesn't go well, even if you really didn't have anything to do with it. So, it not being there, I don't know like specifically what contributed, but he was the guy, he was writing it. And you could pretty much put any of that stuff under the umbrella of him and Ed. So I very much enjoyed that in WWE. I didn't enjoy every single angle, obviously. And some of the stuff in WCW, my, contention, and this is where I think we disagree, just philosophically, a little bit, is I always was under the impression that writers specifically should be heard, not seen, and heard not even through them, through the characters they're writing for, heard. So I always thought that, like, a writer, it's one thing if you're like a Vince McMahon or an Eric Bischoff who had an on-screen presence anyway as an announcer, and people kind of knew who you were, and kind of elevating yourself, as more than that on the television show, because people were familiar with you already and you're a natural performer. I always kind of thought that, to put yourself on television as a writer, is just not something I philosophically agreed with. Because, there's so many talents who are, TV time is precious. It's every minute is so, you have to fight and strive for it. And there's so many, in addition to wrestlers, there are non-wrestlers, like we're talking about managers, announcers, behind the scenes interviewers, all those type of things. So many people to service and so many characters to have on, that even if you have good intentions, which I'm sure he did as a writer to get over other talents over, I've never felt it was like your place as a writer to do that. I always thought it should be, an on-screen character, someone who's taking bumps, someone who's trained to be in that position. So, when I was watching it, especially when I was now, as we were concurrently writing on opposite shows, pretty much, almost immediately, like, within a month of, him and Ed's arrival. So when I saw the powers that be, when I saw the reboot later, with him and Bischoff and everything, it was just one of those things where, you could say whatever you want about, that writing style. It was certainly never boring. There was always something going on. And I just thought, like, wow, that's, maybe that works for him, especially when, and then you start putting yourself in matches and winning titles, even if it was just for a day or two, all that type of stuff. I just thought it was like, wow, that is, I hope he's got a lot of friends backstage, because I would think that you would be a walking heat magnet if you're amongst the boys and, you have wrestlers who are like, I've been training my ass off for years, traveling, independence, everything else. And I'm not going to be on camera because the writer's on camera. That's again, a philosophical difference. And in that respect, it's not something I did. I put myself in a couple of, Vince put me in a couple of backstage vignettes. I was a very successful waiter once with Perry Saturn and Dean Malenko and Terry Reynolds, and a very successful waiter again with, I think, Ron Simmons and Santino Marella. And of course, as I get into the book, again, did not volunteer for it, but was told to be the modulated voice of the talking Raw general manager computer. So who could forget those classic roles? But that was, it's one thing if you are an extra, basically for a day, backstage. It's another thing, to be a full board character. So, those are some of the things I liked, and some of the things, that I didn't necessarily would have done myself.
So, I mean, when Vince McMahon was on the opposite end and he was watching Vince Russo become the WCW champion, how did he react, or was he even watching?
He wasn't really watching. Like, again, I detail in the book, the only time we would watch WCW, and by the way, I think there were, if I recall correctly, like monitors, concurrent monitors on backstage at Gorilla Position, just, and that was, I'm sure, a carryover of when competition was really cutthroat and neck. By the time I joined, WWE was pretty comfortably in front in the Monday Night Ratings wars. But you want to keep track, they're in commercial now, or Hogan's coming out, or Flair's wrestling, or Sting, or whatever, and again, I don't think Vince was watching it, but it was on a monitor, whether it was, Jerry Briscoe, who's in charge of timing the show, or just what, the only time we would collectively watch Nitro is when, and I detailed this in the book, is when we had a West Coast show. Because if we had a West Coast show, we were writing SmackDown typically the next morning. But on the West Coast, Raw would end, at like 8:10 or something like that on the West Coast. So we can get a head start. Like, we don't have to get up early to write SmackDown. We could meet in Vince's hotel room to get a head start on the next night's SmackDown. And eventually, of course, that would evolve to the point where the shows would be written, or at least a version of them, before you even got to the arena. But back then, it was very seat of the pants. And yeah, it's because TNT would replay Nitro and have like a 11 p.m. Nitro showing, we would sometimes put that on in the background. And, that was, again, I detail it. That was one, I don't even know if that was a Vince show or not, but that was the one show where it was outside and Hogan was in the ring, and all of a sudden the wrestler, The Wall, is pointing at him on top of a building that there's no way he could have possibly seen him, because it was so far away. And, I think it was Tony Schiavone, the announcers, were like, oh my God, it's The Wall. He's so far away. Look at the distance. And, we just found that to be one of the most hilarious things, we've ever saw in our lives, just the sheer ridiculousness of it. And Hogan, selling The Wall, who, would need a cab to get over to the arena to, actually confront him. So, whenever there was like a ridiculous angle, being pitched in the room, in the Raw SmackDown room, and there'd be dead silence, it would sometimes be broken up by laughter, and Vince would just look at the writer, usually me, and just go, "The distance," kind of as a reminder to those to that one night.